You all know I am a major advocate for base building in Generation Zero. Gameplay elements like crafting and base building will be some of the things to really extend Generation Zero's gameplay for years to come. And in recent updates, we've seen some steady strides towards crafting, but there's been little to no information on whether or not base building was being considered by the dev team. Until now. Thanks to the excellent work of a member of the community by the name of Ciprriano on the Reddit, we have now seen the first glimpse of a possible base building mechanic in Generation Zero. So I'm going to roll the footage of his and then we'll discuss this because it is pretty damn hype, my dudes. So we can see here that Cipriano is able to place this building here into the game utilizing some tricky mod shenanigans. It looks like the building itself sent him for a little bit of a launch there. But this is really interesting because it looks like some sort of modified hunting tower that you'd be able to use as a lookout post. And I think that this is just really cool. Of course, we do have to take into consideration his utilization of mod tools in order to make this happen. So more than likely, when this does come to the game proper, we will see it function in a much different way than just placing down a boombox and bada bing, bada boom, you have yourself a hunting tower. But I think that it's still incredibly interesting and really hype for things moving forwards. So for a little bit of theorizing on how this might actually function in the game proper, is that potentially alongside the crafting blueprints that we'll be able to obtain in Generation Zero, maybe at some point we'll also be able to obtain building blueprints as well. And from the building blueprints we'll gather up some sort of tertiary resource, and then we'll be able to place the buildings based on the blueprints that we have laid out in our inventory. And it will actually equate to a lot more freeform building than what I had ever kind of pitched towards the team in the first place, which I think is a really interesting way to go about base building here in Generation Zero. Considering everything in the world, base building itself, if it were freeform, could lead to a lot of very interesting scenarios and interesting locations that we as the players ourselves could literally build and design based on our own will and creativity. So for a little bit of further theorizing on this whole thing, I believe that it would be best if base building was left to the host alone. In the end, this would lead to base building being more of a single player facet than a multiplayer facet, but it would also lead to limiting the potential for players to come in and potentially grief other players' worlds by building things that that player would not want to have in the world. So I think that it would function best if this was up to the host alone and was kind of left up to the one player's design as opposed to having multiple cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. I think that it would be nice if players could gather resources together and gather up all of the resources that the player would need, but I think that it would be best if this was all left to just the one player alone per kind of world. It would also lead to some really interesting multiplayer mechanics, in which case every time you jump into a multiplayer game with somebody, you're going to be experiencing something different in each individual world. Now, of course, there is the potential for this all to lead to various things like potential farming assets or potential ways of easing loot gathering in a city or something like that. So potentially we could see some carryover in between players' worlds depending on how all of that base building spans out in the scheme of things. But I do feel like it would create a lot more unique and original experiences when playing multiplayer here in Generation Zero. But we could also see it function similarly to the way bikes work, in which case in the options you have the option to turn off other players' abilities to spawn bikes into your world. And so maybe in the menu we'll have an option to select whether or not there's multiplayer building or just single player building. Now let's take a bit of a closer look at the building that Ciprriano was able to place down. So from the looks of this, this is a modified hunting tower, and you're able to find these hunting towers placed all around the world here in Generation Zero, in various locations. But it is obviously heavily modified due to the larger staircase and the kind of wood paneling that you can see all around the base of the tower itself. And I think that this would be a really cool way of seeing base building come to the world, in a way that we can maybe find some familiar structures just modified to be more utilitarian to the player themselves. Now, there is the potential also for us to see some assets from Alpine Unrest come to the game in the form of a base building mechanic. During the final mission of Alpine Unrest, the Resistance mission, you're tasked with the objective of basically fortifying the Biertonet Hotel. And it would be really interesting to see base building bring that over into the main game as an actual gameplay mechanic. It would be really nice to see the little barricades that are scattered around Himfall Island kind of become an object that we could place into the world and that we could utilize in the world. It would also be really nice to see us be able to put some barricades onto housing in order to make the house maybe a little bit more defensive. Block up some windows so that that way the machines can't shoot you through them. Now this also has the potential of introducing a very fun and fresh feeling gameplay loop into Generation Zero itself proper, being the gameplay loop of gathering resources so that that way you could bring it back to the set location and then building up the fortifications for the set location in order to either create something of your own design, something that you feel is your impact in the world of Generation Zero, or something to utilize in the middle of combat or in the form of some sort of wave defense system or something along those lines. Say like this combat situation that I'm having here in Stenmira. It would be really interesting if I had some fortifications placed around Stenmira that I would be able to then utilize in order to ease the process of this combat flow, instead of just duking it out with the machines out in the open like I am. We've also seen people in the community offer up the idea of going off and locating survivors in order to bring back to a set location. And it would be really interesting to see us be able to designate survivors into whatever freeform base we have built in the game, potentially rescuing them for resources, having them there to aid us in, again, some sort of wave defense, or just having them there as a kind of nice thing to have in the world to feel a little bit less lonely. As well, some people have really wanted the option to have a machine ally of some sort, and maybe potentially base building could lead towards that in some way, shape, or form. Maybe later on down the road we could obtain a building of some sort to develop our own machine to aid us in combat or to utilize as some sort of ally. Or potentially we could mass produce machines of our own. Who knows? Who knows? The potential for Generation Zero, as I've always said, is completely limitless and has the potential to become an absolutely massive game, unlike anything that we see right now. Now, one final thing that I will say here, and this is not in any way, shape, or form discrediting the work that Ciprriano did and pulled off to make this actually function in the game, but this could also just potentially be a new set piece that the developers are planning on trying out, so it could potentially not lead to base building at all. Again, as usual, things like this are work in progress and have a extreme subject to change over time throughout the game's development. So don't expect this to come to the game, is just like my kind of final word of advice. But definitely it shows the potential and shows the promise of things like this happening. And also, it allows us to have the opportunity to give the devs a little bit of feedback here. So if you like the idea of base building coming to Generation Zero, sound off in the comments down below, like this video, show your support for this idea. And if you don't like the idea, sound off in the comments below, dislike this video, and make your opinion heard as well. I think that that's one of the biggest things about the Generation Zero community, is that we have a lot of opinions and a lot of feelings for this game moving forwards. So I think that all opinions and all like views are valid for this game moving forwards, and are necessary for this game moving forwards. But there you guys go, massive development for Generation Zero moving forwards. Potentially one of the biggest gameplay features that we could see get added to the game outside of crafting itself. So hopefully you guys have all enjoyed this video. Hopefully you all have found it informative. And again, you know, I cannot say it enough. Thank you so much for your dudes' support on my videos. You know, we are getting so close to 4,000 subscribers, and it is all thanks to you dudes for that continued support and continued show of love for Generation Zero alongside me here. But thank you so much, and I'll catch you in the next one.